Remember the whole hippie era in Boulder and how that came about, and what was your reaction to what was going on, and how the school district and employees reacted to that? That would have been in the 60s and 70s.
It sure was. They were a novelty for a long time. They camped out. I had a friend who lived in the mountains who once led a raid on a hippie camp, and the mountains people didn't like him.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they didn't take care of the forest. So
who were they, as far as your thought of who were these young people that were? I remember when I came to Boulder in '69, long hair, and there was this big clash. Parents, the fathers usually, and the long hair. And what was that all about?
Dropouts, pushouts from school, people who maybe weren't. I'm not sure this is accurate. Maybe they weren't loved too much at home, so they sought outside companionship. Some of them got into drugs. I'll never forget when LSD came in. About a third of our student body at Boulder High came through the campus. And I'll never forget one of my students that blew her mind on LSD and forever in Pueblo. But some of the kids, they tried to influence some of the high school kids and take advantage of them. LSD, marijuana. They had a thing called mellow yellow. They took banana pills and ground it up and smoked it and got some sort of a high.
How did the school, how did everyone deal with this? Here was this whole element that were revolutionizing. What were they doing? Contaminating the youth of Boulder.
It was tough.
So what did people do? Build walls, or?
Well, they tried to monitor their kids closer. We alerted parents from time to time. I had a parent come in once, the counseling office. She said, my kid's acting funny. She said, I don't know if he's on something. I said, go check and see if you got all your silverware. He was into drugs. She thanked me, but I just tried to give the best clues I could.
Mm-hmm.
The Hill at that time at the university was a very conservative area. It was fraternity, it was sorority, it was Siegel, which was very conservative. And keep in mind, this was a period of time. I mean, they had Pearl Street was a street.
Yeah.
And they still had the rodeo parade through there with horses and floats, and the powwow rodeo down here was where the YMCA is now on 28th, was a very, very major rodeo. And it was kind of rural in the area and conservative, the town of Boulder and the city of Boulder. And, the CU was much smaller. I mean, it's 8,500 people when I was there. And so it was a much smaller city. And the Hill, and I understand those merchants up there. I mean, I'm not saying they were awful people, and this was not only their way of life, but it's the way they looked at the world. Many of them were World War II vets or Korean War vets, and it was still a conservative time in America. And so it was a catalyst, which these people coming through, which, as you probably know, maybe you would agree, maybe not, but I think you would, that it brings about change. I want to get into a Marx theory here, but there's a synthesis out of this that eventually it turns into something else. But it all started, I think, I shouldn't say it all started, but it really, when the hippie / flower children came through, it really created an upheaval. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier Bob McFarland, the doctor, and he was a stalwart in that time. And he looked after a lot of these people, and he started the free clinic up here. Mm-hmm. And he and I were good friends, and he was a very decent man, and he really fought for these people, and did a lot of positive things and made a lot of positive changes for them.
was times of a lot of turmoil, but I came to learn that turmoil was good for people, and that more usefulness came out of it than harm. And the real teaching thing for me was the People's Clinic, because I'd been seeing hippies for a couple of years, and then they started to get killed. You know, there would be a shot in the mountains and things like that, and bodies would be found, and vigilante groups were forming and making a little noise and taking a few shots at people. Anyways, people were getting killed, and there was a lot of concern around here. And one winter, the winter of '69, we started having meetings about what to do next summer when the hippies come back. And several people said we need a medical clinic to give medical care. And I used to argue with them and say, no, we don't need that. There's plenty of doctors in this town, and everybody can get medical care whether they have money or not. But in any case, those three people went out, raised some money. They had some benefit concerts, which the band Zephyr probably did the most on. And they raised about $1,000. And I said, all right, I'll help you because I hate to see you waste that kind of money. So we rented a building at 999 Alpine from Darb Smith, and we were on the third floor at first until some nutty little girl jumped out of the window one day, and so we moved down to the basement. And that clinic was a huge success from the day it opened its doors, which was June 1st, 1970. And people used to stand in line for hours to be able to take a shower, which was hard to come by in those days. And the VD clinic that started ran from noon until 2, 6 days a week, all summer long. And I got my eyes, well, I'd been getting my eyes opened by patients coming into my office before that, because I had seen two young women who were bright and very normal in every other way, who both got gonorrhea, knowing they were going to get it. The guy told them he had gonorrhea, and they said, I don't care. And it was almost as if nobody had any concept of what gonorrhea was at that point. You know, they thought it was easily treated, easily cured, and that was the end of it. And so VD became a big problem in those days, and the people that had it used to teach me a lot about how to deal with it. And if somebody had VD, there was enough willingness to share that we would talk about what they had in front of 10 or 20 other people who were waiting their turn in this clinic. That kind of openness has not existed in my experience since then. People want more privacy with their problems than they wanted at that time. But everybody was so eager for information, and they were kind of trying to be one big family. You know, there was this kind of effort to be communal. And I mean, like, the clinic was going to be called the Free Clinic, and I said, no, that's not a good name. So they ended up calling it the People's Free Clinic, which was kind of like Chairman Mao might have named it or something, you know. But I mean, nobody had very many qualms about discussing either their sexual contacts, their partners, or their diseases in front of 10 or 20 other people who were all kind of the same general young hippie backgrounds.
Any person able to work and support himself in some honest and respectable calling, who shall be found loitering, I mean, imagine all these words and definitions, who shall be found loitering, strolling about, frequenting public places. I mean, what does that make sense? You should go to jail for frequenting a public place. I mean, this is crazy. Or where liquor is sold. I mean, okay. Begging, leading a profligate life, being an idle person, immoral, or not having any visible means of support. That's the essence of it. I mean, yeah, and that's 30 days in jail and a fine.
And then a wonderful kid came to town named John Kirkland, who was known as STP John, because he and his friends called themselves the STP family. And I think they did that because they used to get STP stickers from the Andy Granatelli oil company, and they would give away those decals, and they would stick them all over their clothes. Although some people said they called themselves STP because it stood for strongest thing possible. Mm-hmm. And they took a lot of drugs and drank a lot. And they were basically very hedonistic and not willing to exercise any self-control. The gals in that family used to tell me that they would try to seduce the guys to get into the shower so they could get them to take a shower, because otherwise they wouldn't bathe for weeks. And that would annoy the women. They were mostly teenagers, and John was the leader because he was kind of a natural leader, and he got arrested for vagrancy, and Bob Miller was his lawyer, and they beat the vagrancy statute in the courts, and the Colorado Supreme Court reversed the law, which up until then had said if you're just standing around doing nothing, you can be arrested in jail.
The early VWs coming through with a really beautiful artwork morphed into something less pleasant. And I know that Bob McFarland and I fought about this, but I will tell you that the STV family was not a group of merry pranksters. They could be a real rough group, and they were rough with each other. I was really sorry when one of them passed. I really, truly
John,
was.
You mean?
Any of them.
Oh.
Any of them.
Yeah.
And we talked about several earlier.
Yeah.
Or one would disappear, and you'd say, "What happened?" and say, "I don't know." But that did happen, and there were some really awful stories. It was a difficult. That was a difficult part of that time, because on the one hand, there was a lot of fun. They were having a lot of fun. There's a lot of good things going on. There was huge upheaval, and I was in the middle of that. It was going on, and then some really unpleasant, to put it nicely, very unpleasant things would happen.
You used every kind of thing in the book to keep people from killing each other. I mean, there were people who wanted to just shoot at it, cops.
And what were they so mad at?
They were mad at government. They were mad at, the Hill was our area. There were, a lot of hippies would park and take leaks in front of businesses, and it was a bad scene. I mean, a businessman would call us up and say, "Look, I got 6 kids standing in my doorway, and no customers will come. What are you going to do about it?" "Well, it's a public sidewalk." "What do you do about it?" "Okay, guys, move along, do this." But, you can't do that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so the kids began to feel that this was for their area. And there were some businesses. Tim was running a bookstore, and he's promoting all this revolutionary stuff, That's how I got to know Tim. He was long hair. He's out there saying they got a right to be here, and then you got the business guys who were screaming because no customers would go on the area. It was a pretty bad area. I mean, it was ugly, and kids were not behaving like nice protesting kids. They were, being ugly and bad and defecating and pissing on the windows and things like that. It's just a bad scene. So it was kids. I mean, kids were doing this all over the country. The question, how do you deal with that? And so, I remember a very serious meeting where 200-300 business people came down here screaming at the council, and I told the council beforehand, I said, "I'll take the heat, blame me, because you need a vent, and we need more police enforcement. The police are not beating these kids up, they're jailing them, do something, et cetera, screaming, hollering." And Bob would say, "Well, he's our director of public safety, and we're going to have a serious talk with him, but thank you," And you knew everybody pretty much. And it's a serious issue, but there are limits to what the government can do. Everybody thinks the government can just about do anything, pass any law, any ordinance, do what it is. Well, when it comes to individual behavior, there's very little you can do in public sidewalks. So you can move kids around, keep them busy, keep them active. I mean, when we had riots, my whole philosophy was just tire them out. They'd sit in an intersection, block the intersection. Cops move in, Move them out, and then move to another intersection. Move out, just keep moving them around. And eventually they just get tired, you know. And but if you confronted them, then you had a real serious problem. And I think we got through that whole period of 4 or 5 quite serious riots by simply not coming to the point where, okay, you know, knock the chip off my shoulder, all hell is going to break loose. And I controlled the sheriff and the cops. And I talked to our own police officers and said, look, guys, I'm on the line. I'll do it. I'll take the responsibility. I won't transfer it over to you. So you have to decide where you're going to pull a trigger, you know. Mm-hmm. And so we never had any live ammunition speak of, except maybe some lieutenants or sergeants might have. But the poor patrolmen,
What did they have? They have
empty guns.
They had empty guns.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was there any protest about that from the patrolmen?
No, they really didn't. Because we spent a lot of time talking to them. You know, bad scene. I know. But think about it. Pull the trigger. You put a bullet through this kid's head. You know, what the hell are we going to do? Oh, Christ will hand. Memorial services for till you can't believe it. And what are you going to do? You know, the stupid kid is in there taunting you. You know, sticking a flower in the rifle.
Right.
What are you going to do? Kill him?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, you want to kill him? So you take the pressure off him and you say, that's my decision. I'll tell you. And I think it worked. I have to tell you, I think it worked, you know. But Central Park was ugly bad.
Can you describe it a little bit?
Yeah, it was very ugly. There would be hundreds and hundreds of kids in Central Park. And it's a public park. And then, so because the kids were defecating, we said, well, okay, we'll build some johns, public johns, and then they can use them.
Right.
So the big debate was, why the hell are you doing that? I mean, all you're doing now is making it like almost they could stay there all day and all night and sleep. You know, can they sleep in the park? Well, can you close a park down? Not sure. And so there was a minister, Jim McLean, I think his name was. He was all for the kids. So I got up and I thought, hey, Jim, you're a real funny guy. You know, it's all great, you know, et cetera. So I announced, I said, we're going to put out pamphlets that if you really want to sleep overnight, you can sleep in Jim's church. Yeah, well, old Jim, you know. It was okay to get up in front and be popular, but the minute I turned the church on him, he said, that's a crummy, dirty, underhanded thing to do. I said, don't give me that white-collar jazz, Jim. You know, you're playing it both ways, you know. You get up in front of 500 kids and they cheer you on because you tell them this city ought to be doing this and that. And I said, well, I tell you what, the hell with that. But that was a big controversy, and so I started watering Central Park a lot. I watered the hell out of Central Park. I literally turned it into a mud hut. And so the kids are sitting in all this mud all the time, see, just water the hell
Was that
out.
effective?
Damn right it was effective. It was an ugly place. But I wouldn't tell anybody. I wouldn't say, well, guess what we got to do. I said, get the guy, come over here. Water that thing every 2 hours, so the sprinklers would go on, and you know, kids would get all wet and get mad and roll up their bags, and you know, I mean, but you know, there was intercourse. You could see the kids just screwing on the creek bank. I mean, it was a bad scene.
And we had, for several years, wonderful influx of mostly college kids traveling around the country to see America, but not staying at the Holiday Inn and Harvest House. They'd get $200 or $300 together and travel for the whole summer by camping out and cooking out, and they were having a great time. The city engaged in some immediate ill-advised ordinances, like you can't sleep in your car in Boulder and you can't sleep in the park. They never had those before because nobody ever wanted to sleep in the park before. and we slept probably 75 a night for about 3 of those summers. And we also were concerned about the runaways, because at that time the city and county had no facility for juveniles. They were put into the regular jail. If you picked up a 9-year-old runaway, he had to stay in jail for 3 or 4 days till his parents came to get him. So we had some old houses that we had bought where our parking lot is now. And we used those for what we call a Haven House program, and we said to the police, you bring the kids over here instead of putting them in jail, and we'll keep them, feed them, and house them, get in touch with their parents, and deal with the runaway problem. And we had, for 3 years, about 200 runaways every summer. Everybody was having such a fit. We sometimes would have 4,000 kids in town in Boulder. Mm-hmm. And Central Park is very visible, and people driving up and down Broadway. And so I got in touch with the insurance company in Oklahoma City that then owned the property, and they leased it to me for the summer for $1. And we were going to put some toilets and some barbecue pits and things, and get the kids down there where they could camp, and there wasn't anything there. It was just big acreage. But the city fought us and would not let us build toilets. Really smart. There's a man named Tedesco was city manager at that time, and Ted was a pretty nice fellow. He was kind of dumb, but very kind of pleasant. And he had told me that he would see that we got a permit to put the toilets in down there. And then the city council got on him about it, and he denied that he'd ever told me that. Mm-hmm. So we had lots of interesting city council meetings about that, and they stopped us essentially from making a good campsite there for the kids. And so then the hippie thing got over with, and the kids got settled back. It was very interesting. They wanted to do something that their folks didn't do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You probably were in that. When were you in college?
I graduated in '69.
Right.
That's right.
Were you a demonstrator?
Actually, yes, I did.
Rebeller.
That's right.
And you won a lot of things, you know. But it all faded out, you know, that it was too intense. You did some rebelling and some demonstrating and all that. You couldn't have maintained that for
no,
very
that's
long.
right.
Burned you out.
Yes.
You know. And how did your journey to Boulder come about?
Well, I had done a number of things. I had lived in a teepee for 2.5 years before coming here in the Ozarks and ate nothing but wild edible plants. I had a vegetarian restaurant in Miami called the Supernatural, and which is a wonderful little place in South Miami. And I lived in the Virgin Islands and helped open up one of the first natural food restaurants there in the early 70s. So in 1976, I found myself a single mother and really needed to do something with my life. And I heard about this school, the Boulder School of Massage Therapy. Back then we called it the Rocky Mountain Center of Natural Healing, I think it was called. But I had a boyfriend at the time who worked for Celestial Seasonings, and he was a roadie also for a very popular band at the time called Navarro. And he said, you should come to Boulder. People there are really into herbs and spirituality and holistic health. So I came out here for a Rocky Mountain Center conference, like a healing arts festival. And I just fell in love with Boulder. I couldn't believe the beauty. And the days in the 70s, the massage school was really quite different. Nudity was pretty much accepted. We did rebirthing in hot springs. It was a wild time.
Did you call yourself a hippie in those days?
Well, if you're asking, was I part of the late 60s, early 70s war resistance movement, and there's no doubt about it. I was. Yeah.
Who worked with you in those early days?
Originally, in Aspen, I was on my own. In Boulder, my wife-to-be, first wife-to-be, got to be very clear on these matters, kind of watched me a little, tolerated it, and a friend, Wick Hay, liked it, and Lucinda Ziesing was a fan of what I was doing. And Lucinda had the nomenclature celestial seasonings in high school. The guys, she ran around with a lady they called Trish the Dish, and they called her celestial seasonings because some guys thought she looked like she came from heaven. So when I first heard the name Celestial Seasonings referred to her, I thought that was exactly the great name for the tea company.
I was just about to go to travel agency school when I got a call from someone I consider a very dear friend and mentor, John Hay. And John Hay was one of the founders and political backers of Celestial Seasonings. And he said, there's a job opportunity at Pearl Street Market, and I think you ought to apply for it. And Pearl Street Market is now, well, it doesn't exist any longer, but it was on Pearl and 18th, I think 1825 Pearl Street. And back then, that was considered a really big health food store. I think this is maybe 1980, 1981. And I wrote up a resume, and John Hay said, you can't write all this hippie stuff about living in a teepee and giving birth in a teepee and, you know, being your kid's godmother's, Timothy Leary's wife, and like leave all that stuff out. They don't want to hear about that. And he like tore my resume in half and made me write it again and tore it in half again. Says, no, 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 no. Well, I did, you know, true to hippie form, named my daughter Sunflower Sparkle Mars and Rainbow Harmony Mars. I think my kids also got asked a lot, so your names are Rainbow or Sunflower, were your parents hippies? And they would always say, were. But I kind of like to rephrase that and say, you know, I'm probably more of a zippy, hippies with zip, hippies that have computers and create businesses and help create social change and don't just, you know, laze around, but someone with a lot of zippy type energy.
Well, Peter Drucker, in his book on management, says that a company that does well will learn first to be humble enough to serve. He doesn't use exactly those words, but that's the drift of it. If you want to make money, be a servant. And I feel very strongly about that. And that life is too short just to get rich. What's the point? But if you can do something that's needed, well, and I don't even mind doing something that's wanted. Want and need are okay. I'd rather do something that's needed than wanted. But a combination of the two is terrific. And so I feel that there's a lot of people that would like to hang their star on something more than themselves. They would like to hope that they go through this life and make the world a better place by what they do, and that their hours are not wasted on the production lines, and that their life is not meaningless and valueless, but they can make a contribution to the evolution of the species, so to speak. And I think in our little way we were able to do some of that.